now. The WEF's annual ranking of global competitiveness is out, and the US is dropped to number 4. For years, the US was number 1. Then last year, it was second behind Switzerland. $1 trillion budget deficit is the main weakness for the world's largest economy. Switzerland has stayed on top. Its success is down to innovation and a sophisticated business culture. Sweden is at number 2. The nation is billed as the most transparent. Singapore maintained its number 3 spot, and Germany joins the top 5 this year, helped by the quality of its infrastructure. The lowest ranked country in the European Union, it might not be much of a surprise to you to know that it is Greece. The debt-laden nation fell 12 places to 83rd. Its well-publicised problems with sovereign debt hampered its performance. Well, to take us through the study, we have got a senior economist with us from the World Economic Forum. Margareta Drzeniek joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us. It must be quite difficult to actually work out competitiveness in such a diverse world economy at the moment, where we've got some countries that are still under the shadow of double dip and other countries who have really emerged relatively unscathed from the recession and in fact got stronger. Is it easy to work out the bare bones of what competitiveness is these days?
Well, competitiveness looks at the longer-term structural indicators that determine the future growth performance of countries. So these indicators haven't been really changed through the crisis. But it's true that we see, and in particular with respect to the macroeconomic environment, huge changes, and some countries drop by many positions while others perform much better in this new environment that is characterized by higher deficits, higher debt, and lower inflation overall. So there have been huge changes actually that we observe in this particular indicator.
Now, Switzerland has managed to keep its number 1 spot. What is it specifically about the country that makes it the world's most competitive?
Well, it's not one single factor, obviously. We look at 12 different factors. And in Switzerland, what we see is that it's highly innovative. It has very, very sophisticated businesses. There's an excellent infrastructure for research and development, very good research institutions that collaborate closely with business. We also see that infrastructure for transport, electricity and telephony is very good in Switzerland. And on top of it, it has a very strong institutional environment that is a guarantee for future development as well.
Now, Sweden actually coming up the list into number 2 spot. Transparency is one of the things that Sweden has that's really set it apart.
Yes, transparency setting it apart. Is the most transparent country in the world. And overall strength of institutions as well. So it's not only transparency, it's the efficiency of government, it's a very efficient and effective judiciary, it's a high security environment, it's excellent corporate governance structures as well. So these are all aspects that contributed to Sweden's top position this year.
When we look at Asia, I know Singapore has done very well, again, as might be expected. What about other Asian countries, and specifically China?
China has moved up by 2 positions to 27th, so it's consolidating its position among the top 30 countries, stable across basically all the categories, with particular strength in obviously the market size. It's a huge market size. But we also see improvements with respect to the institutional environment in China and the infrastructure environment as well.
Now, of course, the US used to be the most competitive country in the world. It got knocked off that spot. What are the reasons for its decline? I mean, we must say it's only 4th. It hasn't kind of fallen far, but what's happened?
Yes, in the US what we see is the 3 factors that were already a weakness in the past have deepened. The US is performing even weaker on those this year, and these are macroeconomic stability. As you mentioned earlier, the deficit is continuing to rise, the debt is continuing to rise in the US, so there's going to be problems in the future. The institutional environment continues to deteriorate, and it's also an area that has been weak in the US in the past, over the past years. And also the financial markets are still not bottoming out yet, so we see a deterioration, in particular with respect to the soundness of banks, where it's dropping to 111th, so it's a very low position.
It is indeed. Now, what about the sovereign debt crisis in Europe? That's taken its toll on some European members, hasn't it?
Right. We have seen, well, Spain is dropping a number of places as well, although it's not touched directly by sovereign debt crisis, but by some doubts regarding the sustainability of the debt. We see, in particular, in Greece, with that there has been a huge impact on the ranking. It's dropping to 83rd, and it's one of the lowest ranked European economies right now.
And what about African countries and some of the other emerging nations? Are there any good news stories where we can look at a country that's actually doing quite well, even if it's from a very low base?
There are a number of stories, but I think the most heartening story of this year's report is that we see a closing of the gap for the first time between the developing countries and advanced economies. So the advanced economies, they weaken in terms of competitiveness. That's not necessarily good news, but the good news is actually that the developing countries, they improve their competitiveness by a much higher margin.
And is this because of the global economic crisis? Do you think that actually that has given the BRIC nations and other emerging nations a platform perhaps to build, because overall a lot of them have got lower debt?
This is certainly also due to the better macroeconomic performance during those times. It's true, in particular, China is it's moved up to fourth in terms of macroeconomic performance, which is an excellent position for a developing economy in particular. But it's also due to a number of reforms that have been undertaken in those countries over the past years. When you look at Brazil, when you look at China, to a certain extent, maybe to a less extent also India, there has been some progress undertaken over the past years, and we see this reflected in the rankings. We've seen this in the past. They've been moving up for a few years.
Okay, Margareta Drzeniek, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us this morning.